Welcome to the 2021 Tom Trabasso Young Investigator Award keynote. My name is Matt McCrudden and I'll be chairing this session. As a brief overview, I'll provide the evaluation criteria, then turn over the floor to Dr. Gale Sinatra, who will introduce this year's winner. After the keynote presentation, time permitting, I will moderate discussion. Please add questions, comments, or words of congratulations to our award recipient to the chat function on Zoom. As a reminder, please ensure your microphone is muted during the presentation and that this presentation will be recorded. The Tom Trabasso Young Investigator Award embodies the spirit of Tom Trabasso. Dr. Trabasso retired before I became a member of this organization. To learn more about him, I read his memoriam in the 2006 Discourse processes. Commentaries about him indicate his his commitment to and enthusiasm for intellectual life, his support of young scholars across several generations, and his intellectual legacy in discourse psychology and developmental psychology, end quote. This award goes to an outstanding young scholar who has received his or her PhD within the last 10 years and has made a significant contribution to the understanding of discourse processing and text analysis. This year's winner is Dr. Doug Lombardi from the University of Maryland in the United States. The person who nominates the investigator has the honor of introducing the winner of the award. Please welcome Dr. Gale Sinatra from the University of Southern California, who will introduce Dr. Lombardi.
Thank you very much, Matt. I hope you can see my screen. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Doug Lombardi, the 2021 recipient of the Tom Trabasso Young Investigator Award. This is my favorite picture of Doug. Because I'm not a good photographer, you may not be able to tell, but that is Doug holding up scientific literacy in the United States. He's holding up the wall against scientific illiteracy at AAAS, and that sort of represents Doug to me. As most of you know, I was Doug's faculty advisor for his doctoral program in educational psychology at UNLV and co-chair of his dissertation committee along with Dr. Michael Nussbaum. I first met Doug when I gave a talk at UNLV about the psychology of learning about biological evolution. And Doug was in the audience. And as you might recall, Doug, he came up to me after the talk and he said, you know, everything you just said about learning about the teaching and learning about the challenges of evolution is true about climate change. And I didn't know that much about climate change at that time. And thus a fabulous collaboration was born, the Italian duo of Lombardi and Sinatra. Doug's work centers around deepening understanding and literacy about complex socio-scientific topics. It is both theoretically rich, empirically rigorous, and at the same time, it has a clear and significant implication for practice. In today's political and social media climate, where science skepticism and even science denial are grabbing hold of the public, Doug's work on how people construct scientific understandings and misunderstandings could not be more timely or important. Doug's modeled plausibility judgments of scientific phenomena and how they constrain or facilitate the construction of scientifically accurate explanations is a tour de force theoretical contribution. I am on that piece, but I would have to say I only helped a little bit. That was Doug's genius in that piece. His body of work on the model evidence link diagram, which you'll hear quite a bit about today, which is an instructional scaffold originally developed by Clark Chin, has resulted in 2 NSF grant awards and a slew of publications. This scaffold helps students coordinate text-based information with discussion to evaluate the connections between evidence and explanations. So important to this organization's work. Duggan is an exceptional example of an educational researcher that is deserving of recognition with this award. He represents a model that exemplifies Society for Text and Discourse values, research excellence, and contribution of research to practice. Congratulations, Doug. I'm extremely proud of your accomplishments, and I'm proud of me for getting through that without crying. Without further ado, Dr. Lombardi, the stage is yours.
All right, thank you. Thanks so much, Gail. And let me see if I can, Zoom is like flying a 747, I think, when you get all these controls going. So hopefully this will work. And I'm going to make it a full screen here if I can. Hey. So I'm hopeful that all of you can see the screen. And thank you, Gail, for that talk, that introduction. And I do want to acknowledge the support of the National Science Foundation, U.S. National Science Foundation, which has been very generous and helpful, not only to me, but to my team. And of course, Gale is a part of that team and has been for some time. I do want to start with acknowledgement and thanks. First, I'd like to thank the Society for this award. I actually received the award in 2020. Alex List is the 2020 award recipient. And so I really am appreciative of the committee and appreciative of the whole society in this Tom Trabasso Young Investigator Award. I also want to acknowledge all these people that are on this slide. You will see many of their names pop up. These constitute collaborators that include students. Towards or about halfway through the talk, I will start featuring a lot of student work. Some of those students are involved in the conference this week, and I've been very excited to have them get involved with the society. We also involve classroom teachers in our research, and by involvement, I mean they help us shape our research questions and figure out our research methods and figure out what we're going to do. There are many mentors, which Gale is certainly one of them. Many of them, you'll see society members here, Pawnee, for example, Pat Alexander. It's just been a great time to work with all of these people. So I just want to say thank you so much for the award. And I used, when I was younger, and I still actually do read fantasy fiction novels just for fun. And many of those novels, like The Lord of the Rings or the Shannara series, will have a map. And so my interest in maps may have stemmed from my adolescent desire to read these fantasy fiction novels. So I was thinking about the talk today and where my research fits in with the Society for Text and Discourse. And so I've kind of considered this mainland area here, the Society, which is the Kingdom of Text and Discourse land, with Document Center right there, right in the center of the land of Society for Text and Discourse. And you'll notice that I positioned the Lombardi camp a little bit offshore, but close by. And that's for two reasons. The first reason is I won't talk too much about text today. I will talk about discourse towards the end of the talk, but I will talk more about scaffolding and how text and text processing and the societies help shape my thoughts about this, as well as others. And the other reason that I wanted to be a little bit offshore is because I have these variety of experiences. I received the Tom Trabasso Young Investigator Award, but I'm not a young person. I've had a lot of experiences in my life, and I was reminded of that during Britt and JF's plenary yesterday. They were talking about their first kind of research study that they did together about the controversy of the Panama, our military involvement in Panama in the late 80s and early 90s. And I was actually a member of the military during that time. I was one of the invaders of Panama in a special operations unit. And so I lived the controversy. And from there, I moved on to a major federal research lab with a couple of engineering degrees in tow, and did work in environmental impact assessment. And I just decided that wasn't enough. I was probably making too much money and decided that I should go into education, and became a classroom teacher in the K-12 setting. Started out in high school, worked through various grade levels, teaching science and doing professional development for science teachers. And eventually ended up in the great city of Las Vegas, wandering the halls of UNLV, and I ran into Gale Sinatra there. So I just want to kind of bring that context into what I study, because kind of the mission of what I do is kind of shaped by my military experiences. My passion for science and science understanding is shaped by my experiences working in scientific research, and my commitment to the educational enterprise is shaped by my classroom context. So what do? Well, Gale set the stage pretty well. We develop and apply learning theories, and we do that primarily within classroom contexts, but also within socio-scientific contexts that are important to our world and society at various levels. We aim to contribute to a more scientifically literate society, and hopefully to help position a citizenry that will solve these local, regional, and global problems. Now, I do want to say that I have been accused in the past of trying to save the world. I'm not trying to do that. I just want to say that our team, what we try to do is a very small piece of that to try and better our societies at whatever kind of grain size you want to think about. So we keep that in mind in all of the research that we do. So given that, we started out with this scientific perspective that's built on psychological and philosophical principles, foundations, and much of that has to do with what the work that the Society for Text and Discourse has done, particularly in this box here, which is the source validity preprocessing phase, which many of the researchers that are attending today and that are in the Society have been involved with for several decades. And so I'm very grateful for that. We built upon that to kind of give us an idea about how plausibility judgments are formed about explanations, and how these relate to learning. And so that's what the other kind of two areas represent: the plausibility judgment in the center, and then the learning aspect over there on the right. And I should acknowledge that there are some in the Society that look particularly at plausibility judgments. Tobias Richter, who I believe is here, hi Tobias, and JF, they have looked at, and others have looked at plausibility. And I want to acknowledge what Joe said yesterday, that we all look at kind of these various grain sizes. When it's involved with kind of text processing, it's particularly at a finer grain size than we often look at in our team. But at the heart of it is, I won't spend a lot of time with the source validity preprocessing, but I will revisit it towards the end. I will spend some time with learning, but I'm gonna think about this feedback loop as a former engineer. I think about simple feedback loops a lot. And so this is the feedback loop that's of interest as far as instructions. The idea here is that people often make plausibility judgments about explanations. If they do, they're probably implicit without much thought, but they can be made explicit through this process of cognitive evaluation. And that's what we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail today. So, and I also want to say that plausibility is not a judgment that spans across all of these different domains. It's really just one type of judgment about knowledge. So there's other judgments that many of you all think about, including source credibility, source reliability, trustworthiness. Those are all what I would consider often epistemic judgments. But plausibility judgments, as I said, they emerge from implicit or implicit cognitive evaluations, and they're generally related to knowledge claims or hypotheses or theories, explanations, as we like to refer to them in our research. The beauty of plausibility judgments is there's not a lot of commitment behind them. There often is not. They're often tentative. They may be changeable. They often are. And especially when you position them in topics where there are competing claims. And so when you kind of simultaneously consider these alternative claims, plausibility judgments tend to be a fertile ground. And we've seen that over several empirical studies. So at the heart of what we've been doing through our National Science Foundation support is investigating how this works in classroom context with the model evidence link diagram, which I will refer to a lot as the MEL. This was originally developed, the format of this scaffold was originally developed by Rick Duschel and Clark Chin and Ravikal and Duncan and their colleagues at Rutgers. And we have expanded it dramatically over the past 10 years. And what we're trying to do is help students be more explicit in their evaluations and more scientific. And the way it works is there's 4 levels of evaluation. You can see them up here at the top. It's basically signified by the arrows. These are categories. And it's kind of how well evidence supports a particular model, which the students draw. This is a student example here of how they draw these different types of arrows, linking how well evidence supports each model. And these are competing models. This happens to be about the utility of wetlands for providing ecosystem services, which is actually quite linked to the science curriculum in both middle and high school. And we generally, as a design principle, we usually look at 4 lines of evidence, particularly for our pre-constructed MELs. This is an example of what we call a pre-constructed MEL, where you give the lines of evidence to the students and the 2 alternative models. One scientific, one is a plausible but non-scientific alternative, and you have students consider that. You don't tell them up front which one is the scientific alternative. That's generally the way this works in a classroom setting. And I'll say this a few times, but these lessons take somewhere on the range of 60 to 90 minutes to do a full lesson. And there's a lot more that goes on, but at the heart of it is this diagrammatic or this scaffolded format where we try to get the evaluations to be explicit. So I just want to take a pause here for a second, because often people think that the MEL, that I am proposing that the MEL diagram be used for every type of instruction in every setting, in every context, in every situation. And that is not what I'm proposing. I'm proposing that it is just one of the instructional tools that a teacher may use when doing an instructional unit. She may start out with a model evidence link diagrams and a climate change unit or a climate unit, and then work on other things. And many of those kind of resources have been developed, and there are a lot of the society members here today. Daniel McNamara comes to mind, Matt McCrudden, Kate Bone Gittler. They all work in these classroom contexts developing these kinds of scaffolds. So what we're doing isn't necessarily unique, but it's just part of the enterprise. So I just want to make sure that I acknowledge that what we're doing is just one piece of the puzzle. It's one piece of the instructional puzzle. It's one piece of the research puzzle. So what do we look at? Well, we look at topics related to earth and environmental science primarily, but also astronomy. Those tend to be for a nominal curriculum in the United States, kind of the 4 different areas that they look at. Usually it's climate and weather, it's geology or structure, water and water resources, and astronomy is often associated with earth science in many US classrooms. And many classrooms actually in Great Britain and in European settings as well. So we have developed, over the course of our years, developed 2 scaffolds that relate to the climate crisis, 2 scaffolds that relate to Earth's past and present structure, geologically related, 2 scaffolds that relate to water resources and availability of water resources, and then 2 that relate to astronomical origins. These are generally controversial issues to some degree, or socio-scientific issues of importance. And so these are just the 4 categories that we've looked at over the years. And I looked at today, I originally had on the slide that our N was over 1,000. It's actually N is over 1,500 now. So we've involved teachers and secondary students. The total number is about 1,500. We do design-based research, so I'll talk a little bit about where we are in the design process. And we do quasi-experimental research at the end of our design to kind of get a little more robustness, a little more rigorousness in our conclusions and claims. So we've worked primarily in the Southwestern United States, the Southeastern United States, and the Mid-Atlantic regions, pretty much places that I've been located. And we've also, but the idea is we continue to work in these locations. We've set up some really great networks with teachers and school leaders. These include urban settings, very urban environments. One of our school districts is the 6th largest that we worked with, is the 6th largest in the country. We work in suburban settings, some that are very affluent, some that are not. And we work in rural classroom settings, all with differing demographic characteristics. And I can talk more about that, but I won't probe too much into that for the remainder of the talk unless somebody has a specific question. So I've been talking a lot, kind of setting it up, what we do. Let's get a little data here. This is a culmination of the first project, which ended a few years back around 2018. And so we've done a lot of, this was the work on developing our pre-constructed mills. And we did a quasi-experimental design, and it supported other empirical studies that we had done. And basically what we're seeing here is we're comparing 3 forms of the scaffold: the Mel diagram format, which you just saw, the Mel in a tabular format, which is something that Clark Chin and his colleagues have developed and used in the past. And we looked at that, and then we did what we called the monomel as a third comparison, which is the graphical format of the Mel, but only one alternative, the scientific alternative, is presented to students. And you can see that we're able to, across all the topics, able to shift plausibility significantly for both the Mel and the Met when we're doing that. The Mel diagram is a little more advantageous. It's about 1 category shift. That's on a 10 category scale. And it's a large effect size. And for knowledge, we were able to achieve about 10% knowledge gains over a course of a 90-minute lesson, which we're very pleased about. If you can think about every lesson giving 10% knowledge gain, that would be pretty awesome. That's a medium effect size. The Met also did that, but the monomel basically didn't achieve any results either in plausibility shifts. And the scores here, I'm not going to get too much into measurement, but I can do that during the question and answer session if you wish. Plausibility is the higher the plausibility score, the more scientific the stance. If the score goes negative, that means they have a non-scientific stance. And the knowledge scores are, we look at them in various ways. This is an older way that we looked at it. But essentially, we're looking at about a 10% gain in knowledge. But we weren't happy. And the reason we weren't happy is we had an unpublished study that indicated that the students were doing well with the Mel within the context of the scaffold. As long as the scaffold was there, they were doing well. As long as they were in the classroom context, it was doing well. As we removed that context, they reverted back. And I remember, I'm not sure who asked about it yesterday. There was some discussion in one of the sessions I was in, where we were mentioning, like, hey, how important is transfer? That's kind of like the ultimate desire of an educational enterprise, is to transfer our knowledge outside of the classroom context, and we want to do that too. So what we're doing now with the National Science Foundation's generous support is we're developing and testing an autonomy supportive scaffold, and the idea there is to aim is to increase students' agency and their learning. This idea of students' agency goes back to kind of the motivation research. It goes back to Bandura and the notions of agency that he looks at. it's kind of this idea of epistemic agency, which has recently been promoted by a lot of science education researchers, as well as Michael Nussbaum and Krista Asterhan. And all of these relate to positive learning outcomes and have been shown to be helpful with transfer. So that's what we wanted to try. So this is the Build-A-Mel format, which is not the pre-constructed format. And in the Build-A-Mel format, what we do is we give students 8 cards, it's 8 lines of evidence, and they consider these lines of evidence, and we give them 3 models, one of which is a scientifically accepted model and the other 2 which are not. This is about freshwater resources. And then the students select 4 of the 8 lines of evidence. They select 2 of the 3 models, and they build their own Mel diagram. They kind of put the cards in, or they fill out a sheet, and they build the Mel diagram. And we called it the Build-A-Mel or BA-Mel for short. And the idea here is more autonomy supportive, and the idea is to increase agency. So let's kind of see how this works. You won't get a full idea. We do a lot of, and I'll talk more about our audio and video recording. This is a teacher cam. The teachers that are involved in our studies, they wear these GoPro cameras on their chest area, and they walk around the classroom. So you'll hear one of the students talking, and then you'll hear the teacher talking. It's just a short snippet. It's not the best snippet, but I like it because it's quick and easy. And this is a middle school classroom. And I need to make sure that I put audio on the share sound. I did, so you should be able to hear it, I hope. If you don't, somebody yell at me. Here we go. And action. There we go. Good with that?
Hard to say that it contradicts because, like, it doesn't really say anything that doesn't.
Can't hear him very well yet.
Right? It doesn't really give you a yeah, it doesn't. There's not really. It's hard to contradict it, but it's because it's not like a. It's not really.
So they're talking about how well the evidence supports the model. You can see they've got the cards out. You can see the students are actively working on it. One of the students is talking to the teacher, and
telling you don't really know for sure that you're right. So there's like no way to really 100% contradict. We can't like go back in time to check.
All right. So that's I just want to give you a quick snippet. So what else do we do? How do we do measurement in this complex classroom environment? One of the issues that we have, and anybody that works in classroom context or informal learning context, I know that Gale works in La Brea, and the analogy I'm using here is like a signal theory, where you're trying to get a radio signal. Remember when we had the old AM formats and you got a lot of static, particularly when you're out in the desert. So classrooms are inherently staticky situations. And what we try to do is get the signal and amplify the signal through advanced statistical techniques, advanced qualitative techniques, and through measurement that's mostly embedded within the activities. So it's kind of hidden to the students and the teachers. So we generally measure knowledge at pre and post. That's a research thing. That's something we don't recommend for the teachers that we provide professional development to that don't do research. We have other ways of doing assessment, and those tools are available to teachers. We introduce the students to the models. The teachers introduce them to the models that they're going to be discussing, the explanatory models, and they rate the plausibility of those models before they consider them in the Mel diagram. And then of course now we've got the pre-constructed Mel and the Build-A-Mel. So it's sometimes they do either. We've got forms of both. And so this is a pre-constructed and the Build-A-Mel. They complete their diagram. With the Build-A-Mel, they have to construct it. They have to consider all the lines of evidence in the models, and then they construct it. It actually doesn't take too much longer if they've done a pre-constructed Mel, maybe 10, 15 minutes longer. It's really great to see students get more efficient at this over time. And then they do an explanation task after they've drawn their diagram. And this is how, through qualitative analyses, we've developed a rubric that's actually quantitative at this point. We've done some rigorous studies. I know you can't see it. It's okay. The students write things about the evidence to model connections, and we look at those very carefully. We rate them, and we provide a score. for what they do. And then they provide post plausibility model ratings so we can get shifts. And then we measure knowledge at the end and look at shifts at that way. So that's generally the format, but we do a lot more. Hey, so for those of you that are having text withdrawal, we generate a lot of text. So we have a one-page text for each line of evidence. This is a design principle. We just keep it at one line. Generally, each evidence text, as we call them, has a graphic or some kind of data. And these are scientific. All lines of evidence are scientific. They're all scientific. There's no. We vet these very carefully. We work really hard to write them scientifically accurately, and then we get them checked by scientists that are practicing in the field. And sometimes they're in a tabular format. We work hard on getting the reading level down as low as we can. Generally, most of our evidence texts are at an 8th grade reading level or lower, sometimes 6th to 8th grade, because we work in middle school classrooms and high school classrooms. So we try to get the reading level down. And then teachers, we have different ways that we train teachers on how to approach the evidence text in their instruction. Different teachers do it in different ways. And we've got some, after doing this for several years, we've got some really good ideas about how we recommend that they look at this. But regardless of what they do in the classroom, they're always kind of exposed to these texts. We haven't done any real classic studies on the evidence text, except just kind of the standard to make sure they're reliable and accurate. So we're in the pilot phase. COVID has interrupted our activities, just like they've interrupted everyone's. It's been a tragic situation. We still work with schools and classrooms. One of the things that we did when we had to suspend our in-class operations was we retooled our pencil and paper modes of the scaffold into virtual modes. And then we really dived deeply into several analyses, all led by students. The first one was published by Josh Mandrano. I'll go over that in detail here. Sonia Jamani, she's a first-year doctoral student at the University of Maryland. She's got one in review right now with major revisions at a journal, a peer-reviewed journal. Thalia Stogianos, she is presented on this. She's an undergraduate researcher that did our ERS pass. And now we're preparing a manuscript for submission, which will be ready in about a week, I hope. And then and she's an undergraduate researcher. And then Archie DeBaria has been working on the astronomical topics. And she is she's close to getting that one done. We're hoping for 1st of September. What we've been doing is reaching out to the discipline-based education research community and the smaller outlets, because these are pilot studies. And we're seeing a lot of noise. We're trying to amplify the signal. And generally, we're seeing advantages. What we're doing now is comparing the build-ML to the pre-constructed version. So just going through Josh's results a little bit here. And Josh is presenting at Society for Text and Discourse. He's presenting actually on some research that he did with the model evidence link table. Really interesting work. So glad to have Josh here. So I appreciate that. And what we're seeing, and he's comparing middle school and high school students to see if there's differences. Actually, middle school students have a little higher evaluation, which is interesting. There is no surprise that their knowledge is lower, which I'll show you in a little bit. That's the next slide. And we're seeing some plausibility shifts more favorable to the build-ML. What's been a little disturbing over the course of our pilot studies, but not unanticipated, is that we don't see the results that we saw in the quasi-experimental phase from the previous project. So what we do is go back in design-based research, and we go back and we retool, we fix, we think about things, we talk to teachers, we see what works and what doesn't. And we're also getting some good knowledge gains. You can see that middle school students don't know quite as much, but there is some knowledge gains, particularly with the build-ML. Generally, we see medium effect sizes. These are a little bit lower in actual knowledge gain. They're about 5%. But again, we're in the design-based phase. Actually, we're just emerging out of that now. And I think we're finalizing our materials and ready for a quasi-experimental work as we position ourselves to the classroom. We actually have the teacher workshop starting on Wednesday. We're preparing and hoping the best that we will be in classrooms next year. I've been working with Eric Schauta. Eric is probably here. Eric, I hope you're here. Eric's presenting at the conference this week. Eric is third year, second year, I don't know. Eric is far along on his doctoral studies at the University of Maryland. He's a student of
Fourth year.
Fourth year. Hey, Eric. Welcome. And Eric and I are working on this design. What's of interest here is we're comparing the pre-constructed model to the build-a-mill. Is this the pathways? What's really of interest should be the pathways of evaluation to post-knowledge versus the more complicated pathway of evaluation to plausibility post. To knowledge post, and you can see there's it is more robust with this pathway with the build-a-mill. We've got about almost 300 from our pilot studies of really good quality data. These are students who provided full consent and assent. Their their parents have provided consent. Students have assented to the research. It's a classroom context, so you get missing data. So we work hard to clean up the data and get the strongest data set we can. We've got some nice strong effects. We're not completely satisfied that we're doing the model correctly, and Eric is working very hard on the advanced statistical techniques to get us there, and I'm confident we'll have a publication emerge out of this one. So I'm really excited. So I focused on the quantitative research, but what's really taken us a lot of time this year is our qualitative research. And this is where we get into our discourse analysis. Some time ago, I wrote a paper with Sunaru about discourse analysis using the combined methodology of discourse analysis and social network analysis to make some inferences about students' engagement in the classroom, and particularly their agentic engagement and their agency. And in Suna's case, she thinks about it in terms of epistemic agency. But what we've been doing is looking at that in both qualitative and quantitative forms. So I'm going to talk about that now. This discourse analysis, Donna Governor is one of the co-PIs on a project. She's a professor at University of North Georgia, and she and I worked really hard on looking at a very specific case study, very deep dive of her pre-service teachers as they were working on the mill diagrams. And we use the form of discourse analysis that's called systemic functional. Well, it's based off of linguistics by Halliday. And then Egan's and Slade have developed a coding structure around that to infer discourse quality. And so this is an example of what we do for each kind of unit, which is generally a sentence. Sometimes it's a partial sentence. It could be a couple sentences sometimes, as we go through these very detailed audio and video transcriptions that we make. And so in this case, the pre-service teacher, they open, they initiate, they gave information, they asked a fact, and then we look at the function. This is an opening function. It's an interrogative, which gives us some inference about mood. And then we get some appraisal on that. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a second when teacher one responded, or let's see, this should be actually pre-service teacher one. Sorry about the typo. Pre-service teacher two responded, and they're talking about their evidence to model links. React, support, reply, answer. They provided information. It was declarative, missing structural elements. We get some idea about polarity. So we worked through this analysis. We spent a lot of time coding. We spent a lot of time talking about the coding. We went back and coded. We thought about the way that systemic functional linguistics helped us identify their scientific knowledge construction. And then we submitted it to JARST, and it was accepted and it's been published. So we're really excited about that. And what we're most excited about is JARST is the Journal for Research and Science Teaching, for those of you that aren't aware. The patterns of mood revealed, it's kind of this idea, we kind of built theory into it. We did this in an iterative sense that they used the interrogatives particularly to temper their judgments towards a more scientific stance, but only when they were reaching consensus via negotiation. If they didn't reach consensus, then this didn't happen and they didn't achieve what we would call optimal knowledge construction. So this is an idea of kind of how the moves work within a negotiation sequence, and we developed a graphic on that. And now we're embedding this into our teacher professional development, one of which starts on Wednesday virtually. So we're all excited about it. And we've actually done some teacher professional development already. We give specific advice, and you can read the article if you're interested to know what teachers should attend to when they're listening to student conversations. So it's been really, really useful for us. We've also been conducting a very large mixed method analyses to kind of get back to this notion of agency. We haven't really inferred directly agency yet. This study may be the first one. This is these are 2 conference presentations. I'm working hard on getting another manuscript submitted. It's taken us a long time to go through. This is a much broader, we're looking at much more data. So just to get those transcribed and coded has been a huge process. And then to make sure we're doing reliable and valid coding, we go through several iterations and several types of levels of coding and checks. So we've looked at 2 basic things. In the content analysis, we kind of approach it with a theoretical frame. We approached it in terms of epistemic agency, which emerged from Christodoulou and Osborne's, which they're kind of thinking about how students develop epistemic agency when they're engaging in scientific practices. So this is kind of related to their agency in constructing scientific knowledge. And then this thing that I'm calling, and I haven't figured out the right name for it, but it's learner agency, which is more associated with what we think about a psychologist as kind of, it has some, it's related closely to Bandura's work. John Marshall Reeve has been working hard on this. Erica Patel has been working hard on this. And so based on Reeve's work, we kind of developed these codes. And Vivian Al-Zahari, she's a doctoral student in the teaching and learning department at Maryland, is working on an NARST proposal, and we'll get that out soon. And we were able to code all these. And then we ran it through a social network analysis that I worked on with Josh Jaffe. Josh has already done an AARA submission with this. Thanks, Josh. Josh, I hope you're here. He's also presenting. He's DJ Boulder's student at Maryland, a 3rd-year student, doctoral student, and Josh has been a part of the team. And what we're getting from the social network analysis is we're getting a way to visualize, but also quantitatively do this, and looking at changes in epistemic agency over time. And what we looked at as student triad, these student groups that we worked in this particular classroom setting were, there was 3 students. We identified one as an alpha from their their early talk discourse. And then we identified one as beta and gamma. And then that way we could track changes, and we could layer different groups on top of each other to get an overall alpha, beta, and gamma student. And the size of the circles in those nodes represent what we call their centrality in social network analysis. And what we can see is, in terms of epistemic agency, you see the centrality from the pre-constructed MEL to the build-a-MEL. This is on the water topic, becomes much more collective. And the arrows represent kind of the strength. It's kind of the level of interaction. There was a really great educational research piece came out in 2019 that we've used to kind of quantify the speaking, when you speak to or spoken to during the discourse. And so you can also see, although it's not quite as strong, but you can also see that the terms are more, in terms of epistemic agency, which is the scientific knowledge construction, seems to be going from a more individual sense, the alpha, to a more collective sense. We didn't see that with learner agency. What we saw was kind of a shift from the alpha to the beta, which is okay, but we're going to continue to refine and work on this. But we're seeing large shifts in how they're dealing with these things from the pre-constructed to the build-a-MEL version. And Josh is doing great work on that along with the rest of the team. So I'm going to kind of get out of the MEL work and talk about some other big projects that the team has worked on. this idea of agency has been something that I've been thinking a lot about. I've been thinking a lot about with others. We developed a very large project, an interdisciplinary project. It involved researchers from psychology, Tim Shipley, cognitive psychology at Temple University, and me as an educational psychologist. And then we went out and we solicited what we call discipline-based education research teams in undergraduate STEM. So physics education research, astronomy education research for Janelle Bailey led that, all the kind of the disciplines. And we had them write white papers about what they thought active learning was, because we were basically unhappy with this notion of active learning. Tim and I were talking about it with Nora Newcomb. And it's just a vague term. I think Art, I talked about it with you a few years back you were presenting about how people learn too. And I asked him, you know, Art, you wrote about active learning. What is it? And you were kind of like, and that seems to be from the literature. There's been some amazing studies done that active learning was a bit vague. And so we asked the teams to come back and they wrote white papers and they sent them back to us, and we looked at the white papers and we went, oh no, it was a mess, because they were all different. They were all approached it differently. So Tim and I developed all these series of questions, and they wrote some more. They developed these white papers some more, and then Tim and I took it and we synthesized it into a very large review, and then we sent it back to the discipline-based education research teams, and they hated it. They hated it. Oh my gosh, I almost lost all of them. They wanted to disown me, but we worked with them and we worked hard, and we achieved consilience. We achieved compromise, but what we achieved was a really good, sound document that eventually then we sent to the psychological science and the public interest, and sent out to the reviewers. And the reviewers were, tough, but gave us a lot of feedback. And we incorporated that feedback, went back a few iterations, and were able to publish that in April. So I encourage y'all to go take a look at it if you're interested in this notion of active learning. I think it'll help characterize it more, particularly from an undergraduate STEM framework. I'll just highlight some of the major conclusions. These aren't all of them, but these are some of the major conclusions. As an umbrella term, active learning is just not particularly useful. If we think about active learning, it's really more of a teaching mode. It's not about learning, really. And that's what we came up with. So, but then what can we do to help undergraduate instruction? Well, there's a social construction of meaning that we think is really key for many learners, and that's above and beyond. Cognitive construction is very important, but social construction is very important. And I'm not coming here to bury lecture, as many active researchers do, rather praise it. But often lecture can be relies on the individual for sense making, and that means that it may privilege fewer learners. And so we have to think about how to make lecture a more active framework. And so what we've done is we've developed this construction for understanding ecosystem. We've looked at it in a traditional learning sense, where kind of you have these in a science, undergraduate science, you have domain practice data models, direct experiences. Those are pretty much for the teacher to gather and then interpret to the student. That's a traditional learning mode. In an active learning mode, the student interprets that, and the teacher and the peers work together to construct meaning in the sense. And we elaborate on these in much more detail in this very long review, which I hope all of you read and cite. And then I just added the slide. Yes, I know you got to add the slide, and she was right, because it ties back to the sourcing folks, and it ties back to the talks yesterday, and it ties back to this question about what do we do? It's been a rough go lately with post-truth and science denial, and we're bearing the brunt of that. Many of us have lost loved ones. I lost my mother-in-law to COVID. It's just a terrible, terrible disease, and we should get vaccinated early and often. And I want to tell everybody that if you haven't gotten vaccinated, please do now. Leave this talk and go get vaccinated. But Gale and I thought about this, and really Gale, she said, we need to connect what you're doing with explanations and judgments, epistemic judgments about explanations, and connect it more to the sourcing make it more useful. And so we thought about it, we worked hard on it, and we were able to kind of come up with the idea that yes, sourcing is really extremely important, but there may be situations where you need to go beyond sourcing. And you need to think about how well sources and knowledge claims align, particularly in light of alternatives when there are alternatives presented to individuals. If you only consider about evidence-based reasoning, it may fall short. It often doesn't, but it may fall short. And that's basically what we came up with. And we'd love for y'all to read that as well. Getting close to the end of our time, I have not talked about really much in this short time. There is a lot to know. We've done a lot. There's a lot of resources available. So I encourage you to go to our lab website. We call it ourselves the Science Learning Research Group. It's not just folks at Maryland, it's folks at Temple, it's folks at North Georgia, it's folks in Arizona. We'll take anybody. So if you're interested in working with us, come see us. There's a QR code if that's helps you get to our internet site. And most of our publications are available for free download, and we hope you access them. But I want to make one final point, and this is something the society's been really heavily involved with, and it's back to kind of COVID and science denial. But it relates to these larger projects, the kind of what we did with the active learning paper. It's these projects that I've been involved with Pawnee, with Gale, with David Rapp, and Stephen Lewandowski, and others. We've worked first off on the debunking handbook, which was published in October 2020. It's freely available. And then the COVID-19 vaccination communication handbook, which was available at the beginning of the year. This is really important. I hope y'all download them and use these materials. And what we need to think about is how to cross domains. And I remember Joe started the conference by saying that one of the beauties of society and text discourse, and I just want to echo this, one of the ways that I feel so welcome is that it's a really, truly interdisciplinary society. And we need more of that, more now than ever. We need to reach across the aisle. We need to break down the silos. And we need to think about how to help people think and act more scientifically when in current context. And Gale and Barbara Hofer have thought a lot about that. And they have a wonderful book. I encourage you to go buy it. But we also need to think about doing this in a way that is equitable, democratic, diverse, and pragmatic, because we got a lot of problems to solve and we need to do it together. And so we need to think about how to do that together. So that's kind of how I'm ending the talk. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody may have.
Great.
I hope I have enough time for that.
Did you want to turn off the screen share, and you can maybe turn it back on?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Let me just give me a moment. Like I said, it's like flying to 747.
Brilliant.
Thanks.
If folks have questions, certainly encourage you to either just go ahead and hop in, because we have over 80 people or so, so I can't see all the screens. The other alternative is to pop questions into the chat. So I'll kind of step aside, and I see Danielle, you got your hand up straight away, so please go forward.
I don't have a question. Doug, I just really wanted to applaud you. This is just so fabulous. Your work is so fabulous. It's so interdisciplinary and complex and open to ideas, and it's mature, and it really brings in so many of your experiences. And I just want to say thank you, and fabulous work, just so inspiring and amazing. The career that you've put together, and the work that you've done over the last 10, 12 years, amazing. So that's all I want to say. Congratulations.
Well, you said thank you, but you're welcome, Danielle. But really, thank you. I mean, we don't look too far to find a great model for how to do this kind of research. And we look towards your lab and read all your papers very carefully. Particularly, we think about things like prior knowledge and what that means. And I didn't talk about that. It's really important. I should have highlighted that in some of the links. Is sometimes we look as prior knowledge as a benefit. Sometimes we don't, but it's always a resource, right? And so thank you. I'm going to take the rest of the day off after that. So I think the session's done.
Amazing.
Great talking to you. I'm teasing. Thank you. Art?
Yeah, excellent research. I want to reiterate what Danielle said. I was looking at your structural equation model, the data, and I was really struck with the negative links between complexity, topic difficulty, and things like knowledge and evaluation. That really, once again, shows that people want simplicity, and yet you're trying to train them with all this complex stuff. And what do you think about that?
Well, we've been thinking a lot about that. And Eric and I have particularly been thinking a lot about it, particularly Eric. And we're trying to refine that a little bit more. But yes, it is indeed the more complex the topic. Here is an interesting finding, Art, that you may interest you.
Mhm.
Over the years, we've seen a shift in how people are dealing with the first MEL that I developed on climate change. It's called the climate change MEL. It's causes of current climate change. We have other ones now. And it's basically, are humans inducing climate or is the sun doing it? That's the alternatives we give them. And what we've seen, we may be reaching a ceiling effect on that one. People have basically come to now have knowledge that humans are inducing climate change. But our new scaffold, which is the relation between extreme weather and climate change, which is much more of a complex, nuanced topic, we suddenly see the knowledge drop way appreciably on that. And so, yes, so complexity matters. So we may just, so it's kind of a lifetime of work to think about, okay, so we've kind of solved this, well, we haven't solved it, but the problem of thinking about getting people to think about, hey, are humans really causing climate change? But now they're not really understanding the underlying important mechanisms that they need to attend to take action. And so, yeah, so we're going to think about that some more as we develop our model. We're thinking about that. We need to, Eric and I are thinking about really hard about how to make this comparison of topic complexity more rigorous and robust so we can get it ready for publication. We thought it was good enough for ARA, no slight to ARA, but it's work in progress, and we're going to think a lot more about that. Topic complexity matters. I was kind of surprised. I wasn't surprised to see it, but it does matter. But you'll see that if you look at the slide, which I don't have here, is that you'll see that they probably have some shift in that regard as they do both. Another thing to think about, I have a lot to say, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
It's really interesting to me, this particular point, is that we thought when I was very resistant to the build-a-mill. And my team said, no, students need to build these. And they presented me with a way to do it. And I was still resistant. I said, they're going to hate it. It's going to be too complex. They're going to get too tired. It's going to be too much cognitive load. And what we're seeing is that it's almost the opposite. It relieves the load because they're autonomy supportive. They can build these themselves. And you're all shaking your head. You all do this.
Yeah.
My team do it. I was the dunderhead that didn't know it. And it's so giving them this kind of if we give them agency, I can't say that we are. At this particular point, I think we are, is another step to do it. So people can do it. They can deal with these complex topics is what I'm saying. And we just need to give them the tools and then hopefully figure out a way to remove those tools so they can do it on their own.
Thank you so much.
Alex, go ahead, and Joe.
I also want to echo Danielle's comments. I thought it was just such a cool, fascinating, and comprehensive talk. I had a question about, and maybe you don't want to go in this direction, but I'm going to ask anyway. I had a question about the the kind of boundary cases for plausibility judgments. Because on the one hand, as a non-science person, all kinds of things in science sound so implausible to me, even though they are true. And on the other hand, coming from the social sciences, I was thinking about like innumeracy, and I think Gale has done some work on this too in terms of immigration, but like what you think is a plausible amount of undocumented immigrants. And if you have negative attitudes, you overestimate that. And so I'm wondering kind of how you think about the accuracy of plausibility judgments and what their potential inaccuracy might reveal.
Oh, well, so that's interesting. Because I didn't think you were going to ask exactly what you asked, because I was anticipating a question. Yes, I think about it all the time because it's just so fascinating to me. This whole, from a philosophical standpoint, from a scientific standpoint, what the plausibility judgment means. Originally, I thought, oh yeah, well, plausibility applies to everything and everywhere in every situation, and it doesn't. And it's not important. It is important in some domains. It's certainly important in the science domain. It's important in the legal domain, right? We think about did she commit the murder, or did he commit the murder? Who committed the murder? And plausible explanations. So topic matters. And then also, I think in particular where we see fruitfulness is when it's a controversial topic to some degree, where there's at least an alternative, non-scientific alternative that seems plausible. Does that make sense? So now, what does it mean if you have if your plausibility judgment doesn't align with a scientist's plausibility judgment, like a climate scientist, for example? It probably means your knowledge about the topic is also wrong. We generally see it's not exactly the same. The correlations over time between plausibility judgments and knowledge on a topic are about 0.4 to 0.6. So they're well correlated, but they're not exactly the same thing. So, I'm not sure if I fully answered your question, but I think the way to think about it is that if we can get individuals to shift, well, I said this, if you can get them to shift more towards a scientific plausibility judgment, and I'm meaning that particular domain of science, then they'll probably gain more knowledge on the topic, and they'll be more accurate if that's the way we want to think about it.
That's really helpful. Thanks.
Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I have a comment that is was something I thought about when you were going through the examples and showing the video, and it's related to your comment about actually seems to be reducing cognitive load. One of the things I find really striking about the intervention is the complexity of the different types of format of thinking about the information that the students are asked to understand and use. And there's like a complexity of literacies that are operating here that, you know, I just found it kind of striking, but I wonder if that is part of the intervention. Like you have something you're really targeting, right? But you're also building other information processing skills in the different formats that you're asking people to use to think through the content. Am I on the mark? Was that intentional?
No,
I'm assuming it was, but
well, I don't know if it was intentional. I am fools rush in kind of typifies my life. Joe, but it has been something we've really thought a lot about we have done some research in that regard that I didn't mention. And I haven't led that research, but other people on the team, Janelle Bailey, Sam Buxner, they've looked at kind of how these teachers are teaching with these and trying to think about various teaching strategies. And we have now a pretty good idea about how instruction should go, although I still resist a little bit because I like to keep it wide open for the teaching context. And they kind of say, hey, we need to provide more specific steps for the teachers. And so go to our website and you can see how those play out. We have a lot of resources for teachers that kind of guide them through how they should think about the text. Now, having said all that, we haven't had like, you on the project, Joe. And so there's a lot of data. I still have a lot of data. And if anybody's interested and wants to do some research, contact me. And there's a lot to look at. I don't know exactly how we could do, but we can certainly accommodate that. And someone that's really, really interested in thinking about the specific kind of text processing things should do that. And we just haven't got to it yet.
Thank you.
Hi, great stuff, Doug. I put this question in the chat, but I'll say it here. I was curious whether or not, so you've selected topics deliberately that have some level of sort of socio-political, ideological controversy in society. And that controversy exists mostly among adults, let's say, and maybe less so in the minds of some middle schoolers. So I'm just wondering whether there's any evidence that as these students age and go through high school, and maybe, I don't know if you have any college data, but if there's somewhat of a development of a divergence where you have some students who become even more receptive to your scaffolds because they have more knowledge and they have more scientific skills, sort of literacy and scientific skills that make them open to it, while others develop beliefs and ideologies that make them more resistant to change and pre-post plausibility changes. If you have any evidence though, seeing that.
Yeah, and I should have said, thank you. That's a really important question. I should have said that we've looked at this as young as grade 6. We've looked at it with adults, teachers, and we looked at it everywhere in between. We have seen some really interesting relations, and this is the studies that were really involved with kind of the first project, even when I was developing the model, about how emotions are involved, particularly emotions about the topic. We looked at epistemic motives. And so we have some, and this is another paper that I wrote with Gale when I was actually a student, and this was with teachers. And we also did qualitative analyses on these. We saw some really interesting things. The overall answer though is we basically don't see a developmental trajectory except in terms of knowledge, but actually kind of dealing with the resources and dealing with the tools and dealing with all the information. It seems like it doesn't matter what age you are, you can do this. And as a matter of fact, in that one study that I showed that Josh had led us on, it looked like middle school students were being more evaluative. Now that may be that particular group of middle school students may have been from a particular demographic. So over time, those may iron out. But I would say that as far as the ability to reason and talk about these things, we don't see a huge shift from grade 6 to adults, but we do see a shift in knowledge for sure, in prior knowledge. So, but the way the scaffold presents itself, generally people approach it seriously, and they're open to it. Even if we've seen some really interesting folks from both sides of the aisle that have various thoughts, and that's come up in our discourse. It's been really interesting.
I think we have two. I didn't see the order. We had Patricia Alexander and then Johanna Kakinen. Patricia, why don't you go ahead and go? Then Johanna, I see you have a pretty complex question. You can go after Patricia.
Sure. Well, this is my great colleague, so we don't get enough time to chat about such things. I'm not going to talk about what you've done already because it's so solid, but I want to talk about where it could go. Because it seems to me that one of the things is your heart is in science, I realize, but it seems to me one of the things that I found in terms of generally our writings as scholars and researchers is that we often come up with what we would regard as an explanation at the end of our research. And we put that down as our interpretive frame. Where it seems to me that one of the things, as I've heard others talk about in physics and some other fields, is the need to look at alternative models ourselves, come up with other possible explanations. And sometimes I think our mind shuts down once we've got something that we can explain to ourselves as the way that our data seem to follow. And I do think that we're not trained necessarily to keep pushing the envelope to say, what's another plausible explanation? What's another plausible explanation for what we do? And I'd like to see that kind of part of your transfer, this idea that people just naturally do that sort of thing. And related to that, Doug, it would be nice to put close in plausible models for some of these things to see how those individuals you've got who become a little bit more sophisticated can judge between them.
Well, that's a great idea. Thanks, Pat. And we should work on that. I hadn't thought about that per se. I kind of thought about it a little bit, but not as much. I'm actually working on the next grant. And the idea here is we're gonna work with history and science teachers together. And we're gonna now embed more of the sourcing into it. This is the work of Sarah McGrew and Sam Weinberg at Stanford History Education Group. What I don't know is how this varies from domain to domain. I think that's really important from that. And that relates back to Alex's question to some degree and others' questions. So is the plausibility judgment something that might be activated when you're thinking about social issues from a historical frame, or a social studies frame, social studies teacher, I said history teacher, but so we're certainly thinking about moving in that direction, but I haven't thought about the other direction, Pat, I'm thinking about my model now, I'm sorry. Adding complexity to that and doing that. But you're right, it is a part of the scientific process. And I wonder if scientists actually do what you claim that they do, Pat. I think they should. The community does.
Yeah, I think I was claiming that they should do it. I don't know how much they do it. We fall in our little theoretical ruts. Do you know what I mean? We write and we have this idea when we go in, even though we're open-minded, to use the terms that have been floating around. But I do think we settle in sometimes too quickly.
Yeah, well, we should talk. We never talk. So maybe now is a good opportunity for us. And I'm kidding, everybody. That's tongue in cheek. Pat and I talk a lot. She's been a great colleague, and I appreciate everything from her.
Okay, Johanna, did you want to have a comment or question?
Yeah, a comment really, thanks. This was a really great talk and really, really nice conversation. I was really curious about your social network analysis thing, because I've had this sort of like social awakening happening lately. We're having a big project which is kind of relevant, and I will be picking your brain certainly about these things. But I think that we are often ignoring the fact that these things happen in groups and in social contexts. And when I'm deciding whether I should, convert my Jeep into running on a biogas, I know why I should do it, but of course, I ask a friend, I talk about this, and I construct my understanding of why I should do it and how it's done, how much, all these things in a social sort of interaction. And I think also in classrooms, even though we're looking at the performance of individual students, they do have the classroom around them and their peers. And that's why I think what you've done is absolutely fantastic. You're sort of combining these different perspectives. And but I can, I'll pick your brain, I'll check those papers, and then we'll know more about that social network analysis part. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Johanna. And check out the Donna Governor's paper with me and others. The idea here is that we really try to get them, if we can, in the context of the Build-A-Mel or the Pre-C-Mel, if we can get the student groups to come to a consensus, to negotiate towards a consensus, because they don't get that on their evidence to model links, that's when we're seeing things really move for them. If they don't do that, then we've got trouble. And so now we've got some ideas about, hey, this is what you need to attend to as a teacher in the classroom when you're listening to these conversations. This is how you should make some adjustments. We'll see if it holds up. We're going to continue to do studies in that regard. And then the social network analysis, we're just trying to get our hands around all that with the huge amount of data. So yeah, happy to talk and share more.
Alex?
I, like Joanna, thought the social network analysis was so cool, and like thinking about how kids talk about evidence to each other. I think I just may have missed this, but when you were talking about the alpha, beta, gamma students, did you create groups in some way, or was it just like you assigned some students to be alpha, beta, or gamma? And do you see it, and if you were to kind of categorize students, do you see like how you would do that? Is that like a worthwhile thing to do?
This particular classroom work, and the students were in triad groups. So that provided a framework for us to work on it. And then what we did is we did some preliminary analyses to see which students were dominating talk in the first activities. And we assigned them as the alpha. The second student was the beta, and the third was the gamma. And then what we tried to do, what we'd hoped, just based on these initial kind of how many times they spoke, alpha, beta, gamma, we hoped that that would become more collective, but then we're more sophisticated, and soon we're going to, I'm self-teaching myself with the help of colleagues on Josh has been really great, and my students have been great about helping me understand how we kind of do this quantitatively. So this shifting centrality, so it's not, I'm not the central person like I am in this particular social network analysis that we're executing today, and then shifting that to more collective discussion, and then the level of talk, which the folks from, and I'm sorry I forget their names, it's a recent article in Education Research. I'll send it to you, but I didn't write down their names. So yeah, thanks, Alex.
Sri, you have your hand up.
Hi, Doug, this is really wonderful. Thank you. When I hear this scaffolding scientific reasoning, and this reminds me of the class we teach, the research methods class, and the context here is, can we kind of create such a program of research, I guess, because it's completely different context, and do the same thing for undergrad students in teaching these skills in classes like these, which are essentially most important skills that they learn in undergrad, especially in psychology major and other majors.
Yeah, I haven't thought about it in the context of psychology. That'd be interesting. We could have a learning styles meld. You know, what do they call that? What do they call it? Multiple intelligences meld. I forgot what those are. I know that's one of the big misconceptions, but I haven't thought about it in terms of that. I know that as psychologists, many of us, maybe all of us, try to be very scientific in what we do, and many of us think of ourselves as scientists. So it should work. I just haven't tried it. The other thing that to caution for is, remember that silver bullet thing that I was talking about, is sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So I've learned to be, well, not very, but more humble in how I approach it. And then I also wondered from a personal level, Sri, is this influenced the way I think about things? And I'm still, resistant to change and ideas and things like that. My team's been very patient with me. Gale's been very patient with me. Janelle Bailey's been very patient with me. So I don't know about, how much it affects, our individual lifestyles, our personalities, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, psychology could be an interesting area to think about it. And some people are starting to run with the model evidence link diagram formats and doing their own studies that are outside of our group. Jen and colleagues kind of abandoned it. They weren't finding it very useful, but there's been some folks in Turkey that have worked on it. Ian Thacker has used a lot of our framework in terms of math, and I need to talk to more about Ian, but he's about ready to. He's at University of Texas San Antonio. He's about ready to publish this, and so others are starting to look at it now, and maybe psychology.
Thank you.
Doug, I'll hop in here real quick. Imagine I was a classroom teacher, or you were speaking to teachers, or even in the context of Sri's comments and questions, a university instructor. What general ideas would you want to communicate about how to go about promoting knowledge in these areas?
Yeah, so what we do, basically the kind of, and we do talk to undergraduate teachers. Janelle Bailey is another good example. I've mentioned Janelle a few times. She's a great, she's actually my closest collaborator and my life partner. She was just doing a presentation yesterday at the American Association of Physics Teachers, which is, and talking mainly to undergraduate physics instruction, and about the MEL framework and what to do. And so, and I guess the bottom line here, Matt, is that when approaching certain topics that are complex or controversial, it shouldn't be just approaching it, thinking about it, about, hey, here's the scientific evidence, and this is what's resulted in the explanation, but thinking about it in terms of, hey, here's how well scientific evidence supports scientific explanation in light of these alternatives that may be around, and why the scientific evidence doesn't support the alternative as well. And the MEL framework is one way to do that, but then Michael Nussbaum is thinking about this and has done it in terms of critical questions, and he hasn't done it necessarily in an undergraduate framework, but he has thought about it in terms of, you know, posing these critical questions. So yeah, so it's thinking about how well scientific evidence supports a particular explanation in light of the alternatives. I think that's kind of the takeaway message now.
Thanks, Doug. We have a couple more minutes. Are there other questions or comments that folks have for Doug?
Well, it's lunchtime, everybody. Well, at least here it is in the upper Chesapeake Bay. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. What's interesting, I just want to make one last point, is I think that there's really going to be complementary in the 3 years of the Tom Trabasso winners. I want to acknowledge Jason Bosch's work. Jason has also been, his work has been very influential. And then of course, Alex's work is awesome. And she's going to be talking about multiple documents, I assume, next time. So these are all in evidence-based reasoning. And so we've all been very complimentary. So this is a very important part of what we're all doing. And I just want to acknowledge Jason and Alex's great work too.
I want to add to that, and I want to say that you know, Tom was a mentor of mine, and I know he would be so honored by the people that have been honored by this award, and they truly reflect you know, his breadth of interest and the innovative way he went about asking and answering questions about cognitive psychology, developmental psychology, and educational psychology. So it's been wonderful for me to see this award be given to such wonderful scholars. So thank you all that have been a part of awarding this award, and those who have done the work to get it. So.
Great, thanks so much, Doug, for your presentation and all of the people who attended. Go, if you want to hang out, you can, but if you need a break, the next session, I believe, starts at 1 o'clock. Thank you.
Bravo, bravo.
One thing I've misrepresented, that these meetings can go long. We are only using one Zoom account. And so to get ready for the next session, we need to close out the last Zoom meeting. So anyway, thank you.